it's so much more relaxing to talk to you today than it was last Sunday. Yeah. And in part, as I shared with you last Sunday, just the struggle of expectations that people have when they come to church on Easter Sunday morning, and realizing just the very wide range of experience and spiritual or religious upbringing that might be present in the room on that particular day, and wanting to speak my truth and wanting to speak from Unity's principles and practices and teachings, and at the same time hoping I don't terribly offend somebody and ruin their special day. So it was with great joy and ease that I was approaching this weekend, this series. And it's a series I did about 7 or 8 years ago, and hopefully I've grown and learned some in those 7 or 8 years, and I would be highly arrogant of me to think that you would remember all the things I said 7 or 8 years ago. And not only, hopefully, have I grown and changed, but the world we live in now is different than it was a number of years ago. And you are different. We are probably dealing with some of the same kinds of things we dealt with a number of years ago, but I imagine we're also dealing with some new things. And so this is why, for example, Jesus' teachings in the parables, they live on because they represent truth and core ideas and principles that land on us differently depending upon what's going on in our lives and depending upon what's going on in the world today. And so this series is a series that is me sharing with you my insights on some of my favorite teachers, some of them contemporary and some of them long since gone. And today I want to share with you the teachings of someone that never claimed to be a god, nor did any of his followers ever claim that he was God. He was a teacher that did not claim to be different than anybody else, much like Jesus did not make that claim. But he did say of himself, I am awake. I am awake. And so today I want to talk to you about the teachings of the Buddha, Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha. And there is no way that in about 25 minutes I can do justice to the teachings, the rich teachings of Buddhism. But I do want to touch upon some of the core ideas that can help us where we are today. And as I was thinking about the teachings of the Buddha, and as I was thinking about how Buddha is, in my opinion, looked at today so very differently than the way people look at Jesus today. I shared with you last week one of my favorite quotes from the comedian John Fugelsang when he was asked what he thought of Jesus, and he said, basically, I think of him and I feel about him much the same way that I do about Elvis. Love the guy, but his fan clubs scare me. And as I was remembering that and thinking about that again, I thought, I don't think I have ever heard anybody put down or be upset with any follower of the teachings of Buddhism. And as I was thinking about that, I asked myself, why? And I actually think that part of the reason, maybe a big part of the reason, is I don't think the Buddha and the teachings and the followers around him had the intention to convert people to Buddhism. And nor did they seem to say, and if you do not follow the Buddha, you will go to hell. And so I think there's a very different energy around how Buddhism is appreciated or understood today compared to what's going on in our world today, especially in our country, with regard to Christianity. And so Siddhartha Gautama Buddha's journey began with a question that I think probably every one of us in this room and every one of us online has asked at some point in our lives. And that question being, why do we suffer? Why do we suffer? And Probably, almost entirely, we ask that question not at the high points of our life, but we ask that question at the low points of our life. Why am I suffering? Why is there suffering? Why do bad things happen to good people? And in the heart of Buddhism, and of course you're just getting my understanding of it, which is limited, but in my understanding of it, the heart of Buddhism is it all comes down to the mind. It comes down to the mind. We can think of our mind like a lens. And if that lens is cloudy, then everything we see is cloudy. If that lens is cracked, then what we see through that lens is distorted. If that lens is dirty, then what we see through that lens is dirty, is not clear, is not accurate. The very first verse in the Dhammapada says, "We are what we think. All that we are arises with our thoughts. With our thoughts, we make the world." We are what we think. All that we are arises with our thoughts. With our thoughts, we make the world. I remember a teaching of the contemporary teacher, Byron Katie, who said that the most important relationship we will ever have in our lives. I remember hearing her say this, and I was kind of waiting on the edge of my chair. What's the next part of that statement? The most important relationship we will ever have in our lives, she said, is a relationship we have with our thoughts. And I thought about that. And I thought about how true that is, that my thinking can make me crazy, my thinking can make me sick, my thinking can make me angry, my thinking can make me happy, my thinking can make me joyful, my thinking can make me cry. And I believe the same is true of each and every one of us in this room. The Buddha took it even deeper. We are what we think. All that we are arises with our thoughts. With our thoughts, we make the world. The beginning of the Dhammapada. And I want to say a few words about the Dhammapada here. The Dhammapada is sometimes referred to as the Bible of Buddhism. Not so much the way we think of the Bible, but it's more like a handbook of concise teachings of spiritual wisdom. The word or the name Dhammapada comes from two Pali words. The word Dhamma, which means truth or law or way, and Pada, which means foot or path or verse. So we can translate the term Dhammapada, which is kind of the essence of teachings of Buddhism, to the path of truth. And as I was thinking about that, I thought, well, that's kind of like the name that was taken or given to the first followers of Jesus. They were not called Christians. They referred to themselves as followers of the way. Very simple, very similar, I think, in kind of feeling and intent to the translation of the term Dhammapada. It's significant. The Dhammapada is significant in Buddhism for a couple of reasons. It's significant because it is a distillation, if you will, of 423 verses that capture supposedly all of the sayings and the teachings of the Buddha. And it is suggested that these 423 verses, as concise as they are simple and can be memorized. It's been a long time since I've memorized something anywhere near as long as 423 verses. As I was thinking about this more concise version of the Buddha's teachings, I was thinking about, in a way, we have some of that in our Christian Bible. We look at, or at least I look at, for example, in Jesus' teachings, the Sermon on the Mount. It's kind of like a constellation or a distillation of some of the most important core ideas that he taught. Similar to in Christianity, the teachings of Jesus and the teachings of the Buddha were conveyed for a very long time orally. I did a little bit of checking. I thought that maybe the teachings of the Buddha had been written down closer to the time of his death than was true of Jesus, but not so. The teachings of Jesus, or those words attributed to Jesus, were not written down until maybe 50, 60, 70 years after his death. And according to some of the research I was doing on the teachings of the Buddha, how long was it before or since the time of his death that his sayings were written down? It was much, much longer than that. Much longer than that. A couple of centuries at best. Got me to thinking also how much could be forgotten, right? And yet, what we don't relate to maybe in our culture today, because we rely so much on the written word or the recorded word that we can go back to, that wasn't the case back then. The oral tradition was so important. And so I would imagine that in a culture where oral tradition is so important, that the listeners maybe would have had a longer attention span than we might have today, and would probably be listening much more intently, and probably had a lot fewer distractions to take their minds away from what was being taught or said. So anyway, the Dhammapada has 423 verses, and the thing that struck me about it as I was learning more about this is that according to tradition, each of those 423 verses spoken by the Buddha was in response to a specific event. So in a way, almost like a Q&A. A monk or a student or a mother or a young child asking Siddhartha Gautama Buddha about a problem. And here's an answer from an enlightened being, from a conscious being, on how to handle that particular situation. And so the Dhammapada is important because it is that core. It's important as well because it really emphasizes three main things that I think we can relate to in unity. And these are the three things. The power of the mind. The power of the mind. Many of us found our way into new thought or unity or science of mind because something in our life was not working, right? No? Right? Which is another way of saying we were suffering in some way, in some area of our life. And we came into the teaching and we started to learn things we had not known about before, ideas and principles and practices, all that really emphasize the power of consciousness, of working from the inside out, of working with our minds, of working with our thoughts. All that we are is the result of all that we have thought. So the power of the mind, self-mastery. Buddhism is rich, in my opinion, on self-mastery, in really emphasizing it's not about trying to manipulate our environment or controlling other people, and certainly not about trying to convert them to our way of thinking and being, but rather about learning how to master ourselves, to live our lives more skillfully, to live our lives more skillfully. And then thirdly, the law of karma, the idea that there are natural consequences to the actions that we take, that evil and good aren't judgments from a God, but are actually just natural consequences of actions that we take, and that we, working at the level of mind, can shift the reality of our life experience. If you have had any sort of exploration or study of Buddhism, you would have run into two, not approaches, but two aspects of Buddhism. The Buddha taught 4 noble truths and the Eightfold Path. Raise your hand if you heard about the 4 noble truths and the Eightfold Path. Okay, just some of you have. So the 4 noble truths deal with the the what and the why that we suffer. Remember, Buddha's question was, why is there suffering? Right? Why is there suffering? So the Four Noble Truths is the understanding or the looking at answering that question. Answering that question, the what, the why, and the how. And so the Four Noble Truths deal with what is going on and why it is going on. And then the Eightfold Path deals with how to fix it, if you will. And I'm putting this as much more contemporary kind of language. So one is like the diagnosis, the what you got, and the how you got it. And the Eightfold Path, like the prescription. Now what do we do about it? How do we deal with the truth, the noble truth, that suffering exists? And so the truth of suffering is that unpleasant things happen. Is there anyone in this room that would disagree with that? Unpleasant things happen, even to really good, loving, kind people that we'd look at and say, they don't deserve that, right? Amen? Amen? The truth is suffering. It's real. And one of the challenges I think we have in unity and in metaphysics, in the superficial look at unity and metaphysics, is we look and we think that somehow if we just get all the right affirmations and all the right treatments and all the right vision boards and all the right praying and all the right essential oils and all of this stuff. I left out crystals and I left out a whole bunch of things. But if we just get all of that, that then we will never have suffering. And that's just not the way it works. That's just not the way it works. We don't cover the suffering over with an affirmation. We look at it so that we can try to find a way through it. We make sure that the lens that we're looking through it at is as clear as we know how to make it. So the diagnosis, the truth of suffering, suffering happens. The second being the cause of suffering. Why does suffering happen? Why does suffering happen? We suffer because we want the good moments to stay forever and the bad moments to never happen. I'm going to say that again because in a way, that statement could be life-changing for each and every one of us if we really, really, really understood it. We suffer because we want the good moments to stay forever and the bad moments to never happen. It touches upon the idea of our craving for permanency of the good and our aversion of anything that we would say is unpleasant. And if the reality is that there is suffering in the world, in us, around us, then the cause of it, the making it worse, is our either holding on, trying to hold on so tightly to the good, or trying so hard to resist and push away the bad, that we make all of it so much worse. The end of suffering is the realization that we can find a path of peace in the midst of whatever it is that is happening. And that is the Eightfold Path. That is the Eightfold Path. In the Eightfold Path, the Buddha laid out 8 practices that would help us be able to deal with the experience of suffering in our lives. And here's where, when I do my reading of and trying to understand Buddhism, not as a Buddhist, but as a unity person, that sometimes I get a little lost and a little confused because you have the Four Noble Truths, you have the Eightfold Path, and then of the Eightfold Path, they distill it down to kind of 3 categories. So you got the 4, you got the 8, you got the 3, and then you have even other ways of looking at it. And that's not, I don't mean that in any disrespectful sort of way. But in the Eightfold Path, the steps or the pieces that are referred to as right view, right resolve, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration. And I used to get hung up on the word right. Anybody? Oh, and you know what? I just realized I did not mean that politically. I was meaning it right. I did not mean that politically. I was meaning it right versus wrong. To me, that's too black or white, and maybe it's because I've spent a good part of my attempt to grow spiritually to not be so black or white, to really understand and get more comfortable with nuance and gray. But I've recently learned that there's another common way of looking at the Eightfold Path, and it's not right speech or right resolve or right, but skillful. That to me is like, that doesn't make me wrong. It doesn't make you wrong if I'm missing the mark. It just means I've got some more practice to do. And so the Eightfold Path, and I'm not going to try to teach you the Eightfold Path because I'm going to bring this down to 3 simple things. In the Eightfold Path, though, the categories that they will sometimes put them in is skillfulness around wisdom, around ethical conduct, and around mental discipline. Do you, as I do you see shadows, or that's not the right word, reflections of what we teach in unity in what the Buddha taught? I really, really do. I really do. And the Fillmores studied all of the world's religions deeply. Charles Fillmore, the co-founder of Unity, was deeply influenced by the Eastern teachings. And so the focus on wisdom is developing the right perspective. Developing the right perspective. There are perspectives that we can hold in life that are much more healthy and healing and wholesome and beneficial to us than other perspectives. And part of what our spiritual journey, I think, is about is learning to create the most skill or experience the most skillful perceiving of the world around us. So wisdom, ethical conduct, doing right or doing good because it is the right thing to do, because it matters. And mental discipline. Why do we use affirmations and denials in Unity? Why do we have spiritual mind treatment in science of mind? We do because we're trying to work at the level of mind. We're trying to work at the level of thought, knowing that our relationships to our thoughts are very, very important. And so it's said that the Buddha spoke or summarized his path by 3 things. Can you handle 3 things? I can handle 3 things. And they're simple to say and not necessarily the easiest to do consistently. But the 3 are: cease to do evil, learn to do good, and purify your mind. Take that in for a moment. Cease to do evil, or cease to do bad. Cease to do wrong is another way of saying it. Cease to do evil, cease to do bad, cease to do wrong. Learn to do good. Learn to do good. Purify your mind. Cease to do evil isn't about evil in a literal sense or in a legalistic sense. It's about avoiding actions that we know leave a bitter feeling for us or for another. In verse 68 of the Dhammapada, it is said, "Do only what you will not regret, for the fruit of those deeds is joy. Do only what you will not regret, for the fruit of those deeds is joy." It's what happens when we, in that split second, just before we are ready to hit send on that angry email, we pause and we hit delete. Cease to do evil. Do only what you will not regret, for the fruit of those deeds is joy. Learn to do good is about the planting of random acts of kindness. In verse 223, overcome anger with kindness, evil with goodness, meanness with generosity, and lying with truth. Simple, right? We all understand that. And I imagine in our moments of reflection and true honesty with ourselves, that we can all find places where we can be a little more skillful in it. Overcome anger with kindness, evil with goodness, meanness with generosity, and lying with truth. You know, in a world where there's all this online vitriol and all this just mean-spirited energy that we can see around us, when we choose to react in a different way, when we choose to be the person that is the loving, kind person in line for the cashier who just had somebody, scold them out, when we choose to be that person, we are helping to shift the energy for that person, and I think for ourselves. Cease to do evil, learn to do good, and purify the mind. The meditation practices, whatever practice you have, what's most important is that you're consistent with it. Even if it's simply 5 minutes a day. You know, I'm sure every single one of us in this room and online have certain hygiene habits. We bathe with certain regularity. We brush our teeth with certain regularity. We wash our hair with certain regularity. We have physical grooming, am I right? I know I'm right. I look at you, I can see. I'm right. We're right. We all share that. And purifying the mind is doing that mental cleansing within. And that begins really with paying attention. How can we purify the mind if we're not paying attention to it? Right? This is why when we are in this kind of teaching and we discover a new idea or a new principle and we say, oh, I never thought of it that way, I'm going to practice that. This is why as soon as we say we're going to practice that, like being more loving, being more patient, being more understanding, pick any one of them. It is why as soon as we say that, what's going to happen? We're going to be tested, or it can feel like we're being tested. But I'm not so sure that it's that we're actually being tested, as now our eyes are open to the places we would have been asleep to practicing it before. Does that make sense? When I used to think it was I'm being tested, that felt more punitive. But when I can say, oh, I see it now, so that I can do something about it now. And again, this brings us back to that very first verse in the Dhammapada. What we are, what we think. All that we are arises with our thoughts. With our thoughts, we make the world. As soon as we start paying attention to them, we see where there is room for improvement. And the last thing I think we want to do to ourselves is when we catch ourselves going, oh, I said I was going to be more loving, I was going to be more kind, I was going to be more patient, and I messed up again. Forget the I messed up again part. Say, oh, great, I was paying attention. I saw that I missed an opportunity. I can do better next time. Doesn't that feel much better? Much better. How many of you grow and are inspired to do good when somebody makes you feel bad? Which makes me, and I better end here, but it makes me crazy when I think of traditional Christianity, and especially fundamentalist Christianity, that's so much about, after all the wonderful music to get everybody all roused up, then they make you feel terrible and expect you to do good. Psychologically, does that make sense to you? That does not make any sense to me at all. None at all. Anyway, I better get off of that. So simply looking, as we look at the life that we're living today, to hold gently this idea of the power of our mind, the power of our thoughts, to realize that even when we're doing really, really well, there are going to be times and experiences in which we are suffering or those we care about are suffering. And so while we may only be able to do some things externally to change that, we know that we can work within. We can make a commitment to consistently cease to do bad or wrong or evil, to learn to do good and do it better, and to keep working at the level of our mind. Namaste.